Well, the Florida Panthers unfortunately did not go into Edmonton and get their fourth win of the Stanley Cup Final. It was never going to be easy from the start, but don't you worry, Panther fans. The score still says 3-1 Panthers.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into the Sunday, June 16th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at Monoman12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So the Florida Panthers go into Edmonton and unfortunately lose big by a final score of 8-1 in Alberta, where the pressure was on for the Edmonton Oilers. They switched up their lines, Fogle going to the first line for that top line for Edmonton. And really the story of this game for the Panthers was really a whole bunch of goals against off the rush for them. And really similar to game one for this series, except the Oilers found a way to finish more often. And the Oilers in this one were the more desperate team. And with a 3-0 series lead for the Panthers and the team on the other side just needing to being in a situation where you can't lose, it definitely showed in the Edmonton Oilers' desperation on Saturday night. But we do have a guest here on today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, and he is former producer and host for the Florida Panthers, formerly known as Fox Sports Florida. Now you can see him on Bally Sports Florida, and covers all type of sports for FAU athletics. He is Frank Forte. Frank, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Armando.
Thank you.
A little bit of a rough night last night, but we'll get into it.
Yeah, so tough one for the Florida Panthers last night as they lose 8-1 against the Edmonton Oilers in Alberta. But I mean, like I said at the top, it was really the 7 out of 8 goals for the Edmonton Oilers really came off the rush. I mean, we saw how in games 2 or 3, how really Florida really adjusted to getting really in on their forecheck. And I mean, for the Oilers, really, when it came down to it, it was really board battles in their own end, in the corners, and then having that puck support to get that breakout in, and also really in the neutral zone too, because there was one goal where Edmonton scored where Draisaitl got around Ekblad, and then Draisaitl got an assist to, I believe it was Janmark on one of the goals for the Oilers, and then for Edmonton just and for Florida just a little bit. Maybe when you're up 3-0 in a series, you try maybe too hard to leave no doubt that you might go for a hit that might go out of your structure. So that's how I felt like the Florida Panthers were, what they were trying to do. I mean, you saw with that hit on Ekblad on right before the Tkachuk turnover, right before McDavid made it 4-1. But I mean, what do you think of that when you think of the amount of rush opportunities that the Edmonton Oilers had on Saturday?
Yeah, I think you mentioned something that probably is going to get overlooked in this game, and that is board battles.
Mm-hmm.
I think Edmonton by far won way more than they had won in this one game than they did in the first 3 games combined. They were just more engaged along the boards. And as a result of that, I think you hit it as well, the Panthers lost their structure. I mean, just from the first goal this is another discussion, but what I think should have been a 5-minute major lower play, because the standard I thought was set on the Fogle hit, and I thought this was worse than the Fogle hit. But they didn't see it that way. Nonetheless, I'm not sure if it was Verhaeghe. I haven't gone back and watched it. Just made a really bad decision to kind of jump up and try and grab what was kind of a 50-50 puck, but not really. And just wasn't even close to keeping it in the zone. And there goes Edmonton off on the rush to score the shorthanded goal. And I thought there were a lot of those, A, lost board battles, B, bad decisions, when to try and jump in on Edmonton breaking out, and C, a lot of lost structure as a result. I mean, it was shocking how many rush chances they gave up for a team that, and I'm not a big Mark Messier fan as far as his TV work is concerned, but I thought he nailed it in the one intermission. I think it was the second, when he said the Panthers looked disconnected. And you could see the gaps between the forwards and the defensemen were monstrous. And Edmonton just had, free reign through the neutral zone to generate speed. And that's why you saw, as you said, 7 of the 8 goals coming off the rush. The Panthers looked as poor defensively as I can remember seeing them all season. Just bad decisions by the defensemen. Like the third goal, I don't know what Ekblad was doing on Draisaitl at the blue line, but just allowing him to be a step behind and B, just spin into the zone with speed. And then you even saw Forsling kind of come over to help, but he was kind of in no man's land.
Mm-hmm.
And, the back door is wide open. So it just was a lot of a lack of engagement in the battles, a lot of bad decisions, and way, way too many rush chances. And, Bob got pulled and people are saying, well, there goes the Conn Smythe. Well, okay, maybe, but I don't put any of the 5 on him.
No.
I mean, those guys are the goals 4 and 5. McDavid and Nurse are cruising down the high slot under zero pressure, and just unloading to the upper corner. So the only goal I might put on him was the first, because I thought he kind of overcommitted. And as a result, Montour wipes him out. And there's nobody in the blue paint.
Yeah, and when you have a bump, when you go a little bit out and then the puck is scrambling, then all the anxiety levels definitely go up for everyone on the ice. And also for the 5th goal for the Panthers, giving up the Darnell Nurse one, Panthers were almost caught with too many men on the ice on that one, and then Barkov had to come late to try to back check that one too, to when they were going off the rush. So there was not just miscommunication on the board battles, but also for the Panthers on that one that Darnell Nurse had.
To me, I think the one thing that kind of underlines how, whether they were relaxed, which is kind of human nature up 3-0, or just not engaged enough, was the too many men penalty, when there were 6 guys on the ice for 15 seconds and nobody even realized it.
Yeah.
That to me just said that there wasn't the focus there that was needed to, and I'm not even talking about winning. I'm just talking about making it a competitive game. Because, I think had anybody said before the series, we'll be up 3-1 at any point, or we're up 2-0 and, go to Edmonton and get a split, which was obviously the goal, I think we'd be happy. The caveat to that, as I tweeted out, was just how poorly they played defensively last night. And that's a little cause for concern. Not panic, but concern.
Yeah. And that too many men on the ice was right before the 2nd goal. And also, you mentioned the missed opportunity that Verhaeghe had, where Stuart Skinner was slightly out of his net and just got the glove on it too. That was when it was still 2-1. That could have been the opportunity to tie the game. And think about just if you end up tying that game, maybe you're just not overcommitting too much in the neutral zone and you're getting lost. I mean, that one by that you mentioned the Ekblad with Draisaitl. There was at least 2 feet right before Draisaitl got to him. So it's just the gaps and also the back checks were just all out of sorts on the night.
As good as Ekblad was in game 3, he was that bad in game 4.
Mm-hmm.
He took that frustration, whacking the stick out of, I don't remember whose hand it was with Janmark. And the plays in the neutral zone, Janmark's not even in the play. And he's, what are you doing? So again, I think there was some frustration that crept in, with some of the scrums and certainly that play by Ekblad. But, the bottom line is you've still got 3 chances to win the cup. Hopefully you don't need that many.
Yeah. And thankfully there's, and still, you don't, for me, it's like, it's not a lot. Like there's like a lot of room for error, but you still don't want to think that way. You still want to get it done early for the Panthers. And hey, that's why I was under the whole win it as soon as you can. Don't wait until you get at home, but it's over now. So
yeah,
that's
and you know, somebody put out a poll, do you want the Panthers to win it in 4 or win it in 5 at home? And I said, I want to win it ASAP because I do not want to give Edmonton any oxygen. And last night you showed why, because, and again, the momentum thing you can argue back and forth, right? To me, the momentum is whoever scores the first goal in game 5. That's where the momentum is. Because momentum can change in an instant, right? You give up a bad goal to start off game 5, either team, and now, you know, the doubt starts to creep in. A, is the series over? B, are these guys coming back, depending on which side you're on? So, you know, the momentum is, how do you start game 5? Because I thought game 4, the Panthers had to survive the first 10 minutes because, you know, Edmonton was going to come out with a purpose, and they obviously did not. They were down 2-0. So, and I to your point about the save on Verhaeghe, yeah, that to me was the chance. Because now you've overcome a 2-0 deficit in less than a period in their building, and the building's going to be quiet. And unfortunately, there was a similar chance later in the game that wouldn't have made a difference. But on both of those occasions, the Panthers had about half the net to shoot at. And I think if you look at it, they shot basically in the middle of the net, enabling. Now, full credit to Skinner for trying to get over. And
he was good.
I don't think he knew a whole lot about either save. He was just trying to get a body part out there. But they basically shot it back toward the middle of the net rather than from the middle to the post closest to where they were. And that enabled Skinner to make a good save.
Yeah, the salivating right before shooting it, only to say, oh, he's actually quite there. And yeah, momentum is definitely for them. I mean, when you get those early goals in the second period, like the Edmonton Oilers have, and then how long it took to get your first shot in the second period, that's another thing for the Panthers. It might not be your night for the Panthers. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about maybe some positives that we could take away from the night, for even though the Panthers did lose by a final score of 8-1. We're going to discuss that and more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Policy Genius. A lot of life is unpredictable, but a good life insurance plan gives your family a financial safety net to protect against some of the unknowns. Policy Genius helps you easily compare your options from America's top insurers in just a few clicks. Your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it might not come if you leave your job. Policy Genius has no incentive to recommend one insurer over the other, so you can trust their guidance. They have thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs. Get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com or click on the link in the description to get your free insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Sunday, June 16th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here with Frank Forte, former producer and host from formerly Fox Sports Florida. And you could also find him on Valley Sports Florida, covering all things FAU athletics. So, Frank, there's a reason why there hasn't been a sweep in the Stanley Cup Final since 1998. Crazy to think that was a run of 4 years consecutive where it was sweeps from 95 to 98. Unfortunately, the Panthers were one of those teams, but also with how much the game has changed, you add a hard cap to the league too. But also at the same time in this one, how hard it is to just get that final win. The hardest one is always the last one. I mean, Game 4 in Tampa, Game 5 at home against Boston, too, for the Panthers. And I remember Sam Reinhart after the Boston series, after Game 5, talking about how you lose one and it could be sometimes psychologically how much that could affect in your brain too. But the fact that you have last year's playoff run with what they've done, and also now that they've grown throughout the playoffs, as we've spoken about, they've gotten better through the run. So in a game like this, and also when you think about no sweeps since 1998, and also the stars of the Oilers didn't get going until it was already out of reach. So the McDavids, the Dreisaitl's didn't. It's not happening when it's 0-0 or 1-0 with a 1-goal deficit. So when you hear that, what goes through your mind when you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to sweep, particularly, there's a reason that teams are in the final because they're playing really well. And, the fact that the Panthers were able to keep those star players for Edmonton under wraps for 3 games, you almost felt like they were due for some sort of breakout or explosion or however you want to do it. McDavid's not going to go a whole series without impacting it. And he certainly did last night. He was the superstar that he showed the superstar that he is. But it's incredibly difficult to sweep, and I don't care whether you get to 3-0, 3-1, whatever it is. We get to 3-0. It's incredibly difficult to sweep any team. Playoff series, each game is different. I mean, you're going to have highs and you're going to have lows, and it's how you manage those throughout a series, which enables you to eventually win. And I thought the Panthers really managed the highs and lows of the Tampa series. I don't think was ever really in doubt. It was 3-0, then 3-1, but I think you could see that the Panthers were clearly the better team than Tampa, but they managed, they lose game 1 big in the Boston series. And, obviously they come back and manage that and go on to win it in 6. And the same thing with the Rangers. They're down 2-1. And, they're going to overtime in game 3. And whoever scores there, if it's the Rangers, then you're looking at the big deficit. So I think they managed those very well throughout the playoffs, and hopefully they're going to manage it again, and being back home and trying to close it out in front of their home fans. But, the caveat is you've got to play better than you did because it was an uncompetitive game. Not just the scoreboard. I just thought on all those little areas that we talked about in segment 1. So, they need to get their act together if they want their names on the Silver Cup.
Yeah, and it's crazy also because special teams goals, they had 2 of them on the night, but when you think about the series if you were to zoom out and look from macro level with this series right now, with where the Panthers are at, the power play goal that they did give up was on a 5-on-3 with Fogle taking an extra hack at Bobrovsky. I was scratching my head a little bit of why that was a 5-on-3 for the Oilers there, for them. But also, even in that 5-on-3 before the Edmonton Oilers scored, Panthers were still not breaking their structure on the penalty kill. Yeah, it's difficult whenever you don't have that extra defenseman to clean it up before Ryan Nugent-Hopkins scored there. But still, that's a little bit of a positive that I could take away from the Panthers in this one, because I mean, Panthers were their emotions got a little bit of the best of them, especially in the third period. You're getting blown out badly, but we've seen it even in the regular season. I mean, when their 11-game road winning streak ended in Carolina, I mean, I don't necessarily think sore loser is necessarily a bad thing in sports, but in this case for the Panthers, whenever you know that there's a 2-day gap in between games 4 and 5 there too, and you know that you're up, it's like the Panthers still in a way showed that they didn't want to be pushed around there. So that's kind of what I took away
from the 10,000 foot view. The penalty kill's been really, really good. When if you said after 4 games Edmonton would have 1 power play goal and it'd be 5-on-3, you'd be going, great, where do I sign up?
Yeah.
The flip side is also true. The power play has not been good at all for the Panthers, and yet they're up 3-1. So, Edmonton's shut down the power plays throughout the playoffs, not just the Panthers.
Yeah.
What is it, 48 of the last 52 or whatever the number was? I don't have it off the top of my head. But, they're at 90+% killing penalties in the playoffs. That's going to win you a lot of games. So I think the special teams for the Panthers, the penalty kill's been great. The power play, not nearly good. And yet they're, again, 15 wins, 1 win away. So, even if things aren't working, they're still in a great spot. The other thing is, Matthew Tkachuk, he started off the playoffs playing really well, but he's got, 1 goal in his last 15 games. He's had a ton of assists earlier in the playoffs, but, this series, he's just not been there. And again, you're up 3-1. If you just said Tkachuk doesn't have a point in the series, but you're up 3-1, you'd be going, wow, So it's a lot of two sides of the coin thing right now. Like you said, if the power play had 1 goal in 4 games and Tkachuk hasn't scored, and you're up 3-1, you'd be going, that's great. But I think to close it out, guys like Tkachuk, like the second line wasn't good last night. They need to be a lot better. And the first defense pairing, more so Ekblad than Forsling, needs to be a lot better. Looking at the other side of it, if you're Edmonton, you're saying, well, we've survived without our star players really having, McDavid the exception last night, having a huge impact on the series. It's been their depth guys that have, been producing, even though they're down 3-1. And if the big guys get going, well, then that's what happens last night. So the Panthers got to find a way to shut down one or the other. They've got to get back to shutting down the big guys, or they've got to close off those depth guys, because then you're increasing, most likely the ice time for McDavid and Draisaitl, and the fatigue factor goes up.
Yeah. And McDavid was around the 17 minutes. Bouchard, 20 minutes. He's usually playing 28. McDavid's usually doing 25 too.
Well,
so
they didn't have to. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You've got to force them into playing the big minutes by, knocking down their depth guys and not allowing them to have the impact, obviously, that they had last night. They scored the first 3 goals before McDavid got on the board. That was the goal where I said, okay, this is over. It's not happening tonight. We come home 3-1 and go from there.
Yeah. So for before the series, I was thinking, if Ekholm, McLeod, and Janmark are scoring too, they're in trouble. But the Panthers have been able to contain them through at least most of the series. Okay, now we're talking a little different. Even though they got in on the scoring in Game 4, the Panthers know that they've seen the formula. Chris Knobloch spoke about the Oilers showing that they have a chance to win against this team. They've proven that they can. He said right before Game 4, the Panthers definitely do have that too. They can go to that. And that's a good way to continue our conversation in segment 3, where we'll discuss more of that, and also what the mindset of the team is going into Game 5 from Emirates Bank Arena on Tuesday night. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And summertime means baseball, NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Finals, and more. And you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on anything from Finals MVP, Conn Smythe, to who's going to hit one out of the park. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add big to your summer bucket list. And now maybe the Conn Smythe odds have shifted a little bit with what happened in Game 4. So now you could put those bets right on FanDuel, and you could check out those anytime on FanDuel. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Sunday, June 16th edition of the show. And I want to tell everybody out there, if you are a father, happy Father's Day to everyone. And I want to say publicly to my father, thank you for understanding of my travels during this Stanley Cup Final run for the Florida Panthers. I did call him this morning, so thankfully I did so right before recording there. So Frank, discussing more of this one. I want to discuss a quote of what Paul Maurice said, and this is what he said. It was the quote. It was the first opportunity that we've had as a franchise to feel the 2 days before clinching a game, the excitement of it, the emotion of it. We'll learn to channel that. That's all part of the process. Close quote. And for me, the whole letting it marinate in the next 2 days of knowing that you just flat out got beat, and going home, getting that last change and having it sit there. And also, one of the goals towards the end, I think it was on the entry by Perry. Paul Maurice chose not to challenge for offside. They didn't even show a slow-mo replay on ESPN. I tried pausing it and to see if it was. Honestly, I'm glad he didn't. And for the fact that to send a message to your team of just let it marinate and just let this come out of you more when it comes to Game 5. But also going back to Maurice, that the process over results sometimes. I usually don't subscribe to that in the postseason, but I could also appreciate how he's so still even keeled. He even talked about, even before Game 4, about how can you not be in a good mood? Obviously, the score of the series says something. We're having a different conversation if they lost Game 1. But when you hear that from Maurice, so just about keeping a cooler head and still knowing about the process of trying to win a championship and knowing that you just got beat, how do you process that?
Well, I mean, he's pushed all the right buttons so far, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I trust that that message is going to get through. Let it. And I agree with you on the challenge. I'm like, I didn't think it was a big deal either way. Just you take the punch, you get up off the mat,
Mm-hmm.
go back to doing what got you into this position in the first place, to be a game away from having the parade. So I think he has a good sense and a good feel for what his team needs and when they need it. I think he's shown that throughout the season. And we don't know what goes on when the doors are closed and all that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I get the feeling that he has a good sense for, what these guys need and when they need to be told this or that or the other thing, or just, as you said, let it marinate. Maybe he goes in, maybe he doesn't even go in the room last night and say anything. Maybe he just lets these guys stew in the fact that, we were terrible tonight, and think about it on the plane ride home, and now get ready. So I have a lot of trust that he knows what buttons to push or maybe not to push.
Mm-hmm.
There's something to be said for that, as you mentioned. So I think they'll be in a good mindset. They'll be in a good place mentally come Tuesday night.
And I want to go back to what you said about whether he feels like he needs to step in the room or not. And from the Game 6 victory against New York Rangers, when he stepped into the locker room to talk to his team, his speech was not long. It wasn't even 2 minutes. It was like maybe 45 seconds. So it's not just about when, but it's just knowing that it's quality over quantity on what he says to the group too. It's just like keeping it. It's like that acronym KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. For that, so I think for him, he's going to take that approach of the KISS acronym too. So I think that's also what he's going to do when he talks to his group. Even he doesn't need to go to the point where I forget there was an assistant coach for Edmonton after one of the practices in between game 3 or 4 where there was a long conversation. I don't think it's going to require that even when the Panthers do skate before game 5 too.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a long conversation either. These guys, look, they've been super successful to this point, regular season and playoffs. I don't think you need to say a lot to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know in knowing a few of the players, not many, since I've been out of Fox Sports, and although I did do a few things with the team after that, but they know. I mean, it's mostly a veteran group, right? So young veterans, the oldest veterans that are part of the core group are 28, so they're still in their prime. I mean, you don't have to tell them. You don't have to tell Aaron Ekblad you played poorly last night and you need to be better. He knows that. And to me, like the motivational thing by coaches is overplayed.
Yeah.
If you as a professional athlete can't motivate yourself to win one more game to win a championship, or to do the right things to win a game to win a championship, then it's probably time to start thinking about retiring, or you were in the wrong business to begin with. I mean, I hear all the time, well, coach's job is to motivate his team. And I think that's true to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's less true the higher you go up on the food chain, college athletics, professional athletics, because, you know, by that time, these guys have heard it all. And it's got to come from in here. You've got to be your own motivation. And if you can't get yourself to that level, then that's a problem.
Yep. And one more thing before we get out of here is another thing that he says. And by the way, Barkov, he also said after the game, we either win or we learn.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Paul Maurice also says emotional advantage, and he's used that so many times throughout the year. He's also spoken about playing against teams that are on the bubble of a wild card spot, elimination. I didn't necessarily hear him use this too much in recently, but I do want to discuss that before game 4, this was kind of the gap of the emotional advantage that Edmonton had, because Panthers, they're going into a road environment, raucous crowd. Obviously, you have the mosh pit outside, but now going back home, it's a little tighter now for the Panthers now that they're going, knowing that, and it goes back to the whole saying, you're not in trouble until you lose at home too. So the panic meter is actually maybe at a 2 right now for me, I would say.
Yeah.
So that's because the fact that the emotional advantage the gap is gonna be smaller. That's why for me, I'm not fazed by this loss for the Panthers.
Yeah, I would agree overall. Again, the only concern is just how poorly they looked last night in terms of getting out of their structure and away from who they are as a hockey team.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the breakdowns were egregious.
Yeah.
Right? So that's my only concern. That they've got to put a stop to that, and you'll get a better result. That's the only thing that concerns me, was just how far out of sorts they were, and out of position and out of their structure, and just, you know, doing things that they don't normally do. That's the concern for me. The fact that it could have been 6-1, 7-1, 8-1, 4-1, and I'd have been saying the same thing, that the goals they gave up were, letting Edmonton play their game. Edmonton is so dangerous off the rush, and they had way too much time and space through the whole night. And that's the thing that concerns me. So
Yeah.
Again, you're in a great position. You've worked all year to get 16 wins in the playoffs, and they've got 15. So let's just close the door. I mean, that's the biggest. Edmonton, like I said, the mistakes that Edmonton made in the first 3 games, that totally flipped last night. They didn't make a big mistake leading to a Panther goal. And when they did, Skinner was able to bail them out on those 2 half-empty net occasions. So to me, it's just getting back to playing the way that makes you successful. That's the biggest thing. I don't care what the whether it's 3-1, 3-2, 3-3, you've got to get back to doing what makes this team successful. And they got, not even partly away from it last night. They got completely away from it last night. And that was the only thing that concerned me. I'll be honest, I expected them to lose game 4, right? Because I just thought Edmonton would come out hitting on all cylinders, trying to do everything possible, the desperation, that whole cliche thing. So I kind of expected to lose game 4, but it's the manner in which they lost it as a team, And you mentioned the Conn Smythe Trophy before. Who knows how that's going to go. Let's assume for the moment that the Panthers win this one, whether it's next game, 6th game, whatever. You can make your pick, but I really feel that to this point, and I know it's going to sound cliche, but there have been contributions up and down the lineup. To me, it hasn't been just one guy. Because people were talking about early, well, Bob wasn't really challenged that much in the first 3 series, which is true, but he made the big saves when he needed to make them. He's been great. Verhaeghe's got 10 goals. Bennett's been impactful despite them. You look even down to a guy like Steven Lawrence, had a couple of big goals earlier in the playoffs, right? Forsling's been outstanding. Mikkel has been good, again, for the most part. So it's been everybody. And one guy's going to win it. I get it. But to me, it's as close to a team thing, I think, as we've seen in a while.
Yeah, and hey, it just goes back to just playing back to your game and getting in on that forecheck, because the Edmonton Oilers were definitely not making those mistakes and really fought off the Panthers forecheck well. And the goal differential might be at 0, but the series is still
that's the bottom line.
That's
the bottom line. It doesn't matter how, it matters if.
That's all that matters here at the end of the day. But Frank, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you for joining me to recap the game 4 between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers, where the Florida Panthers lose 8-1, but still have a chance to win the Stanley Cup on home ice on Tuesday night from Amerant Bank Arena. Tell everybody where they can follow you online, my friend.
Okay, so on X, it's at Frank J. Forte. You can see our www.fausports.com, where I post videos, and also come mid-August, we'll ramp up again on Valley Sports Florida with the Inside the Owlsboro TV show. So look for us there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Frank, and hope to see you next time, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Armando.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on Locked On NHL Network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Frank Forte, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.